have you ever let someone else's words ruin your entire day? What if I told you that you can live free from anger, irritation, or being bothered by anyone, no matter what they say or do? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll discover 7 life-changing principles that will protect your peace, and you can start applying them today. One of the most powerful steps to never getting angry or bothered by anyone is learning to recognize your triggers. Craig Groeschel often emphasizes that anger rarely comes out of nowhere. It's not an automatic reaction. It's usually the result of something deeper, something inside you that has been stirred. When someone says something irritating, or when circumstances feel unfair, the real question is not what they did, but why it triggered such a strong emotional response in you. Understanding your triggers is like turning on a light in a dark room. When you can see clearly what causes your emotional reaction, you no longer have to stumble blindly in anger. You gain awareness, and awareness is the first step toward freedom. Most of us have hidden triggers that we don't even realize. It could be criticism that reminds us of past failure, impatience that surfaces when things don't go our way, or even certain tones of voice that subconsciously provoke defensiveness. These triggers are deeply personal because they are connected to our experiences, our values, and sometimes our unresolved hurts. Craig often explains that when we become aware of these triggers, we can start to see patterns in our behavior. We begin to notice, for example, that certain people or situations consistently push our buttons. Instead of reacting with anger or frustration, we can pause and reflect. Recognizing your triggers also requires honesty with yourself. It's easy to blame others for making us angry, but in truth, we are responsible for how we respond. Craig's teaching encourages a shift from blaming to observing. Ask yourself, why did this comment make me feel this way? Why did this situation bother me so much? The answer often reveals the real source of your reaction, which might be insecurity, fear, pride, or unmet expectations. By identifying the root, you can separate the person or situation from your emotional response. Someone else's words don't have to dictate your peace. Another part of recognizing triggers is understanding your physical and emotional signs. Craig often points out that anger manifests in the body before it surfaces in words or actions. Your jaw might tighten, your heart rate increases, or your mind races with negative thoughts. These are signals that you are approaching a trigger point. The moment you notice these signs, you have a choice. You can either react impulsively or you can step back and regain control. Recognizing the trigger early allows you to implement strategies like deep breathing, reflection, or even temporary removal from the situation to prevent unnecessary conflict. Craig also emphasizes the power of journaling or self-reflection as a tool for identifying triggers. Writing down moments when you felt irritated or angry can reveal patterns that aren't obvious in the moment. Over time, you start to see recurring themes such as specific environments, behaviors, or attitudes that provoke a strong emotional reaction. With this knowledge, you can prepare yourself mentally and spiritually. You can pray, meditate, or affirm your peace ahead of challenging situations. Finally, recognizing your triggers is not about self-condemnation. It's not about labeling yourself as too sensitive or easily angered. It's about empowerment. When you know your triggers, you can develop strategies to respond differently. You can choose calm over chaos, peace over frustration, and understanding over bitterness. Craig reminds us that this awareness is not a one-time event, it's an ongoing journey. The more we pay attention to our triggers, the more freedom we experience, and the less control others have over our emotions. One of the most transformative lessons Craig Groeschel teaches about never getting angry or bothered by anyone is the distinction between reacting and responding. Many people live their lives on autopilot, reacting to every insult, every frustration, every unexpected circumstance with emotion-driven impulses. A reaction is immediate, uncontrolled, and often regretful. A response, on the other hand, is intentional, measured, and rooted in awareness. Craig emphasizes that you have a choice in every interaction, especially those moments that have the potential to trigger anger. You can either let the moment control you, or you can control the moment by choosing your response. Reacting is easy because it requires no effort, no thought, and no self-control. It is instinctual. When someone cuts you off in traffic, criticizes you unfairly at work, or says something rude, your initial emotional reaction might be anger, frustration, or defensiveness. You might snap, yell, or internalize bitterness. This is how most people handle challenging moments. Craig Groeschel often points out that living a reactive life is like being tossed in a storm with no anchor. Every wind, every wave, every word from someone else has the power to destabilize you. Reacting may feel justified in the moment, but it usually results in regret, relational damage, and a loss of personal peace. Choosing to respond requires pause. This pause, even if just a few seconds, gives you the opportunity to evaluate the situation and regain control of your emotions. Craig often illustrates this by asking his audience to imagine a pause button between stimulus and reaction. When someone says or does something upsetting, you mentally press that pause button. In that space, you can ask yourself, what is the most loving, wise, and effective way to handle this? This pause allows you to break the automatic cycle of anger and choose a response that aligns with your values and long-term goals rather than giving in to momentary frustration. Another essential aspect Craig teaches is that choosing your response doesn't mean ignoring wrongdoing or pretending everything is okay. It doesn't mean suppressing emotion. Instead, it's about choosing a way forward that protects your peace, maintains dignity, and preserves relationships. For instance, you can calmly state your boundary without being hostile, or you can walk away to cool down before addressing conflict. The act of choosing your response is empowering because it shifts control from external circumstances to your internal wisdom. You are no longer at the mercy of someone else's words or actions. Craig also emphasizes the spiritual dimension of this principle. Choosing your response often requires guidance, prayer, or reflection on Scripture. By grounding yourself in truth, you gain perspective that tempers emotional reactions. You recognize that not every offensive word requires retaliation, and that sometimes patience, silence, or grace is the stronger, more powerful choice. When you consistently practice responding instead of reacting, you cultivate resilience and a sense of calm that others cannot shake. Furthermore, Craig points out that practicing response over reaction is like strengthening a muscle. It takes intentionality, repetition, And sometimes failure, there will be moments when you fail, when anger slips through despite your best intentions. But each time you recognize the misstep and reset, you are training your emotional intelligence and building the habit of measured responses. Over time, responding becomes natural. Your peace becomes less dependent on circumstances or other people and more rooted in your deliberate choices and inner strength. Choosing your response also has ripple effects beyond your personal peace. When you respond calmly in conflict, it sets a standard for those around you. People are drawn to your composure and integrity. Your example of self-control can influence families, workplaces, and communities in ways that reactive anger never could. Craig often reminds his audience that a life of calm, intentional response is not only for personal freedom, it's a testimony to the power of self-mastery and the influence of a life than impulsibles rather than opposes. Groeschel often emphasizes for one of the most overlooked tools for never angry or bothered by anyone is perspective. The way we interpret situations, words, and actions shapes our emotional response far more than the events themselves. Anger and frustration often arise not because of what happens to us, but because of how we perceive it. Perspective gives us the power to step back, see the bigger picture, and refuse to allow other people's behavior to dictate our peace. When you cultivate perspective, you're no longer a prisoner of impulsive emotions. You are choosing to see reality through a lens of wisdom, patience, and understanding. Perspective starts with the understanding that other people's words and actions are often reflections of themselves, not of you. Craig points out that when someone is rude, critical, or inconsiderate, it usually reveals something about their own struggles, fears, or insecurities. They may be reacting out of pain, frustration, or a lack of self-awareness. The more we internalize this truth, the less personal their negativity becomes. Instead of immediately taking offense or letting anger rise, we can pause and ask, what might be driving their behavior? Is this about me, or is this about them? This shift in mindset transforms how we process challenging encounters and allows us to maintain emotional stability even when provoked. Another aspect of perspective is understanding the temporary nature of conflict. Craig often teaches that many things that bother us today will seem insignificant in a week, a month, or a year. People forget harsh words, moments of unfairness, or minor irritations faster than we realize. By expanding our view to the long term, we can evaluate whether a situation is truly worth our emotional energy. This doesn't mean ignoring injustice or pretending we aren't affected. It means reserving our emotional bandwidth for things that truly matter and refusing to let fleeting irritations control our inner life. Perspective also involves empathy and the ability to see the world through another person's eyes. Craig Groeschel frequently underscores that understanding someone's circumstances can completely change how we interpret their actions. A coworker who snaps might be under enormous pressure. A friend who criticizes might be struggling with self-doubt, or a family member who frustrates, you might be navigating challenges you cannot see. Empathy doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it allows you to respond with understanding instead of anger. By seeing the humanity behind the actions, your own emotional response softens and peace becomes more accessible. Craig emphasizes that perspective is closely tied to spiritual grounding. Viewing life through the lens of faith, truth, or higher purpose enables us to rise above petty provocations. Scripture, reflection, or personal values can provide a framework for evaluating circumstances objectively. For instance, the reminder that God or a higher purpose is in control can radically shift how we respond to challenges. Instead of reacting emotionally, we can respond wisely, knowing that our ultimate security and peace are not dependent on the opinions or actions of others. Finally, perspective requires conscious practice. It's easy to get caught in the immediacy of a situation and allow emotions to dictate behavior. Craig often challenges his audience to develop the habit of asking perspective, shaping questions. Will this matter tomorrow? What is the larger context? How would I advise someone else in this situation? By consistently reframing moments through these questions, we retrain our minds to prioritize long-term peace over short-term emotional satisfaction. Over time, this discipline transforms how we experience relationships, work, and life's inevitable frustrations. Anger loses its power, irritation diminishes, and you begin to live with a level of calm and clarity that is both freeing and inspiring. Craig Groeschel frequently teaches that one of the most essential steps to never getting angry or bothered by anyone is learning to guard your heart and mind. Your inner world, the thoughts you allow, the emotions you nurture, and the beliefs you embrace ultimately determines your response to the outside world. Anger and frustration often begin not with external circumstances, but with the internal environment we cultivate. Just as a fortress protects its inhabitants from outside attacks, guarding your heart and mind creates a protective barrier against negativity, criticism, and provocation. It is a daily, intentional practice that separates those who live in peace from those who are constantly unsettled by others. Guarding your heart begins with awareness of what you allow to influence your emotions. Craig emphasizes that our minds are like gardens. What we plant, water, and nurture will grow. If we continually dwell on criticism, negativity, or resentment, these seeds of bitterness take root and produce anger. But if we fill our minds with truth, encouragement, and perspective, we cultivate peace. This means being selective about the information you consume, the conversations you engage in, and even the media you allow into your mind. Guarding your heart is not about isolation, it's about intentional curation. You decide what thoughts, messages, and attitudes are permitted to shape your emotional landscape. Craig also highlights the importance of setting healthy boundaries as a key component of guarding your heart and mind. Some people, intentionally or not, provoke, manipulate, or drain your energy. Protecting your emotional well-being may require creating distance, limiting contact, or clearly communicating boundaries with those who consistently bring negativity into your life. Boundaries are not walls of isolation, but shields that preserve your peace. By setting limits, you prevent toxic influences from taking root and maintain control over how you engage with the world. Another essential aspect Craig teaches is the role of mental and spiritual discipline in guarding your heart. This includes regularly reflecting on your thoughts, practicing gratitude, and meditating on truth. When you focus on the positive, affirm your values, and remember your purpose, you strengthen your ability to withstand provocation. Negative comments or actions from others lose their power because your inner foundation is secure. Craig often reminds his audience that peace is not merely the absence of conflict. It is the presence of control over your own mind and emotions. Guarding your heart also means being vigilant about emotional triggers and self-talk. The words you say to yourself in response to someone else's behavior can either escalate frustration or calm it. Craig stresses that self-awareness is the first step toward mastery. When you recognize that a certain comment is attempting to provoke anger, you can consciously choose thoughts that affirm your worth and values rather than allowing your emotions to spiral. This practice rewires your automatic reactions and strengthens your emotional resilience over time. Craig further emphasizes that guarding your mind is a continuous journey, not a one-time effort. Life constantly presents challenges, difficult people, and situations designed to test your composure. By maintaining daily habits that protect your mental and emotional health, prayer, meditation, reflection, and affirmation, you build a defense system that allows you to remain calm and grounded even in the face of provocation. Your heart becomes a sanctuary where peace reigns, unaffected by the noise of the world or the negativity of others. Finally, guarding your heart and mind is ultimately an act of empowerment. It shifts control from external circumstances to your internal choices. By intentionally cultivating a protected, disciplined, and peaceful inner world, you no longer give others the power to determine your emotional state. Craig Groeschel often emphasizes that this is the foundation of a life unshaken by anger, irritation, or frustration, enabling you to walk through life with confidence, clarity, and enduring peace. Craig Groeschel consistently teaches that one of the most powerful ways to never get angry or bothered by anyone is learning to respond with grace and compassion. In a world filled with criticism, conflict, and confrontation, it's tempting to respond in kind, to match anger with anger, rudeness with rudeness, or defensiveness with defensiveness. Yet, Craig points out that this instinct only fuels conflict and drains your peace. Responding with grace is not about passivity or weakness. It is a deliberate, courageous choice to act from a place of strength, empathy, and understanding. When you respond with grace and compassion, you break the cycle of negativity and reclaim your inner calm. Grace begins with control over your own emotions. Craig often emphasizes that when someone provokes us, the first response is instinctive. It's a raw emotional reaction. To respond with grace, you first pause, breathe, and center yourself. This pause allows you to choose your words and actions rather than letting your emotions dictate them. Graceful responses are intentional and measured. They create space for understanding, reduce tension, and often disarm the person who was seeking to provoke you. By consistently practicing this, you train your mind and heart to operate from composure instead of chaos. Compassion is the other key ingredient. Craig teaches that many people lash out because of their own pain, fear, or insecurity. When you respond with compassion, you see beyond the words or actions to the person behind them. Compassion does not mean condoning harmful behavior. It means recognizing that everyone is fighting battles you may not see. This perspective allows you to respond with kindness rather than anger, empathy rather than judgment. By approaching conflict with compassion, you maintain your dignity and reduce the likelihood of escalating the situation. Craig also highlights the importance of listening as part of a graceful response. Often, people respond in anger because they feel unheard or misunderstood. Taking the time to listen, truly listen, before responding can transform interactions. Listening demonstrates respect and can diffuse tension before it escalates. It allows you to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. When you pair listening with a calm, compassionate approach, your words carry weight and your presence becomes a stabilizing force in any situation. Another aspect Craig emphasizes is humility. Responding with grace requires humility, the ability to admit when you don't have all the answers, to acknowledge your own imperfections, and to prioritize peace over winning an argument. Humility shifts the focus away from ego and control and toward understanding and resolution. It allows you to approach even difficult people with a heart that seeks reconciliation rather than revenge. In doing so, you protect your inner peace and influence others positively without sacrificing your own values. Craig also stresses that grace and compassion are habits, not one-time decisions. Life presents repeated opportunities to practice these qualities in traffic, at work, at home, or in public spaces. Each time you respond with grace instead of reacting with anger, you strengthen your emotional resilience. Over time, these responses become your default mode. People notice your calm, empathetic presence, and you become a stabilizing force in relationships and communities. The practice of responding with grace and compassion builds a reputation for integrity and strength, making it harder for negativity to penetrate your life. Finally, Craig reminds his audience that responding with grace and compassion aligns with the highest version of yourself. It is a choice that reflects maturity, wisdom, and character. While others may try to provoke, manipulate, or offend, your response becomes a testimony of self-control and love. By consistently choosing grace, you cultivate an inner peace that is resilient to external disturbances, and you demonstrate that true strength is found not in domination or retaliation, but in the power to remain calm, kind, and compassionate under pressure. Craig Groeschel frequently emphasizes that one of the most effective ways to never get angry or bothered by anyone is to meditate on Scripture and truth. Our minds are constantly bombarded by opinions, criticisms, and negative thoughts, and if we allow these external influences to dominate, our peace is easily disturbed. Meditation on truth, particularly spiritual truth, acts as a stabilizing anchor for your mind and heart. It allows you to view situations through a lens of wisdom and perspective, preventing others' words or actions from controlling your emotions. By intentionally filling your mind with truth, you create a foundation that guards against anger, frustration, and offense. Meditating on Scripture is more than just reading verses. It is about internalizing and reflecting on the principles that guide your life. Craig often teaches that when you let truth saturate your thinking, it reshapes your emotional responses. For example, when faced with criticism, recalling verses about patience, love, and God's sovereignty can transform how you process the situation. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond from a place rooted in understanding and faith. This practice gradually rewires your thought patterns, helping you replace automatic reactions with thoughtful, peace-filled responses. Another key aspect Craig emphasizes is the discipline of repetition and reflection. Meditation on truth is not a one-time exercise. It is a daily habit Setting aside time each day to focus on scripture or affirmations trains your mind to prioritize what is eternal and unshakable over what is fleeting and reactive. As you repeatedly remind yourself of these truths, your inner life becomes less susceptible to provocation. You begin to recognize that external events do not define your value, worth, or peace. Instead, your identity and stability are grounded in what is unchanging and true. Craig also highlights that meditation on truth is a proactive defense against anger. Life will inevitably present challenging people and difficult situations. Without intentional grounding in truth, it is easy to become reactive, allowing emotions to dictate behavior. By meditating regularly, you create a mental reservoir of strength and clarity to draw upon in these moments. You gain the ability to pause, evaluate, and respond intentionally rather than being swept away by temporary frustration or irritation. This daily practice builds emotional resilience and equips you to navigate even the most trying circumstances with calm and confidence. Meditating on scripture and truth also influences your perspective on others. Craig points out that understanding divine principles such as forgiveness, love, and empathy allows you to see beyond surface level offenses. You begin to understand that people's actions are often shaped by their own struggles and limitations. This awareness reduces the tendency to take things personally and empowers you to respond with patience and grace. By internalizing these truths, you train your heart to focus on solutions, compassion, and long-term peace rather than short-term reactivity. Furthermore, Craig emphasizes that meditation deepens your connection with God, purpose, and inner wisdom. It is a way to align your heart with what is higher than fleeting emotions. When your mind is saturated with truth, you are less likely to be tossed around by external negativity. The calming influence of meditative reflection helps you remain centered, grounded, and unshaken even in the face of provocation. Over time, this habit transforms not only your responses, but also your character, cultivating a natural composure that radiates peace and stability. Finally, Craig reminds his audience that meditation on scripture and truth is not only protective, but empowering. It equips you to live a life that is free from the control of others' negativity, criticism, or insults. When you root yourself in truth, your emotional state becomes self-determined, anchored in reality rather than perception. By committing to this practice, you cultivate a mind and heart that are resilient, steadfast, and filled with peace, creating a life where anger and irritation lose their power over you. Craig Groeschel consistently emphasizes that one of the most practical and powerful ways to never get angry or bothered by anyone is to cultivate daily habits of gratitude and self-awareness. Many of the moments that trigger anger are rooted not in external circumstances, but in the way we perceive and process them internally. By intentionally practicing gratitude, you shift your focus from what is wrong or frustrating to what is good, meaningful, and life-affirming. By combining this with self-awareness, you develop a heightened understanding of your emotional patterns, triggers, and responses, which empowers you to choose peace over frustration in every situation. Gratitude, as Craig teaches, is not just a fleeting thought or a polite acknowledgement. It is a deliberate lens through which you view life. When you start your day by identifying things you are thankful for, you create a mental environment that resists negativity. For example, when someone behaves rudely or unfairly, a heart saturated with gratitude is less likely to take offense. Gratitude allows you to recognize that the actions of others do not diminish your value or your blessings. Craig often illustrates this by reminding his audience that anger rarely exists in hearts that are fully aware of their blessings. The more you focus on what you have rather than what you lack or what others do, the less power external negativity has over your emotions. Self-awareness complements gratitude by providing insight into your own emotional landscape. Craig emphasizes that knowing yourself, understanding your triggers, habitual responses, and tendencies toward irritation is essential for managing anger. Self-awareness is the practice of observing your emotions without judgment and identifying patterns that may lead to frustration. For instance, you might notice that certain situations, like being interrupted or feeling unappreciated, consistently provoke a strong emotional reaction. Once you recognize these patterns, you gain the ability to intervene before your emotions escalate. Self-awareness allows you to pause, evaluate, and respond intentionally rather than reacting impulsively to circumstances or the behavior of others. Craig also teaches that combining gratitude with self-awareness creates a powerful feedback loop for emotional resilience. When you consciously reflect on your responses and acknowledge what you are thankful for, you cultivate a sense of control and clarity. Gratitude softens the heart, reducing the tendency to take offense, while self-awareness sharpens the mind, allowing you to understand why you might feel provoked in the first place. Together, these practices create a strong foundation for maintaining composure and inner peace, even in challenging or stressful situations. Another important aspect Craig highlights is that daily habits of gratitude and self-awareness rewire your thinking over time. It's not enough to practice these occasionally. Consistent repetition builds a mental and emotional framework that naturally resists anger. When you regularly identify what you are thankful for and examine your emotional responses, you begin to approach life with a calm, measured perspective. You start to notice that the small irritations and provocations that once seemed overwhelming are no longer capable of disturbing your peace. This ongoing practice strengthens your character, nurtures patience, and allows you to respond to others with greater empathy and composure. Craig also points out that gratitude and self-awareness influence relationships positively. When you are aware of your emotional patterns, you are less likely to project frustration or irritation onto others. When you practice gratitude, you are more likely to appreciate the positive intentions, efforts, and contributions of those around you. This combination fosters healthier interactions, reduces conflict, and creates an environment where peace, understanding, and cooperation thrive. Finally, Craig emphasizes that the daily practice of gratitude and self-awareness is not just a technique, it is a lifestyle. It is a conscious decision to cultivate a mindset and heart that are anchored in positivity, truth, and understanding. By consistently reflecting on your emotions and recognizing your blessings, you build a resilience that allows you to navigate life's challenges without being shaken by negativity, criticism, or provocation. Over time, these practices transform your inner life, making peace, patience, and calm not just an aspiration, but your natural way of being. In summary, Learning to never get angry or bothered by anyone is not about suppressing your emotions or avoiding conflict. It is about cultivating awareness, intentionality, and inner strength, from recognizing your triggers to choosing your response rather than reacting impulsively. Each step empowers you to reclaim control over your emotional life. By gaining perspective, guarding your heart and mind, and responding with grace and compassion, you begin to navigate difficult situations with clarity and peace. Meditating on scripture and truth anchors your soul, providing a foundation that external negativity cannot shake, while daily practices of gratitude and self-awareness transform your mindset and emotional resilience. Craig Groeschel reminds us that freedom from anger is a journey, not a single event. It requires intentional choices, consistent habits, and the willingness to grow in self-understanding and spiritual depth. Each time you apply these principles, you strengthen your ability to remain calm, centered, and unshakable, even when faced with provocation, criticism, or frustration. The combined power of awareness, perspective, grace, truth, and gratitude equips you to rise above reactive patterns and live a life defined not by others' actions, but by your own character, values, and peace. When these 7 key principles become a part of your daily life, you no longer live at the mercy of circumstances or people. Instead, you walk in confidence, composure, and freedom, demonstrating a powerful example of emotional mastery and spiritual maturity. You create a life where anger, irritation, and offense no longer have control, where your relationships are strengthened, and where your inner peace becomes unshakable. This is not just about managing anger. It's about transforming your life, influencing others positively, and experiencing the profound freedom that comes from living with intention, wisdom, and grace.